The China Dragon. Swish sweep, swish sweep, tinkle crunch. That's how the broom went as it whisked across the floor. Nai studied the floor with her brown eyes, which were set into the warm facets of a kind and wrinkled face. She swept the broom across the floor again and again until she was satisfied that not a single sliver of the white china lay on the darkly stained wooden floor. A small girl sat with her head down, sniffing at fading tears. She was young, not much more than 3 years. Her dark hair hung in straight bangs to her eyebrows, while the rest crouched in a tiny bun at the back of her head. Nai picked up the dustpan with a grunt. With her ample weight causing her some trouble, she toddled to the waste bin. The little girl reached out a hand from where she sat with her legs dangling off the chair. Nai tipped the dustpan. The little white shard slid into the waste bin. Nai placed the broom in the closet and stepped to the little girl's chair. She reached her wrinkled hand down and caressed the girl's cheek. Their eyes met the instant before the little girl hopped from the chair, raced to the waste bin and peered into its dark depths. The old woman moved to the kitchen. The teapot clinked and the silver spoon clacked against the sugar bowl. The little girl stood still and silent. She stared at the minute horns and the expressive eyes of the shattered figurine. It was a great honor to be allowed to touch Nai's dragon. The girl reached down a thin arm with a slightly pudgy finger extended. The tiny, polished scales slid beneath her finger and felt as they had only minutes before. She closed her eyes. A clatter sounded from the counter beside the little girl. She opened her eyes. Incredible eyes of the deepest black stared back at her. The thin, scaly body stretched behind the needle-like horns of the China dragon. Its muscles rippled soundlessly, as if the china were soft and supple, like real flesh. The dragon stood to its hind feet, sniffing the air. Its nostrils flared wide as it turned to the left, then to the right. "You hungry?" the little girl asked. Her bright face held no trace of her shame and sadness that had darkened it seconds before. The dragon tilted its head to the side and brushed its snout with a forepaw. A tiny, forked tongue flicked out in anticipation. The little girl laughed and toddled to the far side of the kitchen. A bowl of rice sat on the counter just out of the girl's reach. Her short arms couldn't quite reach it, even when she stood on her tiptoes. A sound like a teacup clinking onto the saucer sounded to her left. She started and giggled as the China dragon stepped toward the rice with its back low and nostrils pulling at the gentle scent of the still warm rice. It took a short glance at the little girl and raced to the bowl. With deliberation, it wrapped its tail around the base of the bowl and placed its forepaws on the rim. Then, with no sign of animal instincts, apart from eating from the bowl with its mouth, it ate. The little girl lay her hands flat on the counter and rested her chin on them. She giggled every time the dragon looked at her. When the dragon finished eating, it wandered like a cat up to the girl and rubbed the top of its head against her nose. "Ah, you'll make me sneeze," the little girl exclaimed and drew back. The dragon implored her with its black eyes. It tried to step off the counter onto the air and nearly lost its balance. "No!" The little girl dove, ready to catch the little creature if it fell. "You stay back from the edge," she ordered. The dragon tilted its head. Then, with a snap of its china tail, galloped to the back of the counter. It stood with its head cocked and its black eyes large and round, as if asking if it had done right. The little girl smiled and stepped back to the counter. The dragon came forward again, but paused halfway, coiled and sprung away toward the sink. The girl snatched at the waving tail and caught air. The dragon slipped and clanked into the sink. A cry of dismay parted the little girl's lips. She ran to the sink and peered over the lip as well as she could. The dragon stood shaking its head. In horror, the little girl reached for the white horn which lay where it had broken from the dragon's head. The dragon made no sign that it noticed what had happened. It stood as tall as it could and looked at the faucet spout. The little girl sighed and grabbed the broom so she could turn the lever to open the faucet. Water spilled out and covered the dragon's scales, causing them to glisten and sparkle. The dragon drank long and deep. When it was done, it leapt to the front edge of the sink and balanced as water puddled at its feet. "Come down from there before you fall." The little girl held her hands up for the dragon to step onto. The dragon sniffed her hands, but clattered to the far side of the sink, slipping several times. "Now come here," the little girl ordered sternly. She held her hands out a second time, but once again, the dragon sprang away. It darted to the back of the counter, then to the front. Back and forth it darted, running down the length of the counter. When it reached the end of the counter, it crouched, with its front paws wrapped over the edge of the counter. "Got you!" The little girl breathed as her hand closed on the squirming creature. No sooner had she started bringing the dragon closer to her in order to lower it to the floor than she cried out in pain and dropped the dragon. The dragon had scratched her thumb with its claws. When it landed on the counter, the other horn and the end of its tail shattered. The little girl wailed, "Don't keep hurting yourself! Come down to the floor!" The little white dragon paid no attention to her. It sprang to the cutting board and batted at a carrot top that had hidden out of sight when Nai had cleaned the counter. It tossed the carrot scrap into the air and jumped after it. A tiny claw broke from its paw as it smacked the cabinet. Another claw and another piece of its tail broke from it when it landed on the counter. "Stop! Don't hurt yourself!" The little girl grabbed at the dragon with dismay. The China dragon darted out of the little girl's reach, flicked its now short tail, and cocked its head, as if to ask the little girl what the matter was. The little girl grabbed Nai-Nai's step stool, placed it in front of the dragon, and clambered to the top step. She reached her slightly pudgy hands for the dragon. As she reached, she forced herself nearly onto the counter. Her dangling feet kicked the stool, sliding it out of reach. The dragon saw the little girl's eyes grow wide and her mouth peel apart to scream for help. The little white China dragon raced forward and caught a finger in its mouth. It pulled with all its strength, but the little China claws slipped and scraped along the counter. Little dots of red appeared where its needle-like teeth punctured the girl's skin. She shook her hand, causing her to slip farther to the edge. After the dragon regained its balance from being shaken loose, it crouched, wiggled its haunches, and leapt. It fell from the counter without a pretense of flight. The little girl slipped from the counter. As she fell, she glimpsed the China dragon struggle for purchase on the stool. Then, it crashed to the floor, shattering into an unsolvable puzzle. The little girl whimpered and cried as she lay on the floor in the midst of white China fragments. Nai bustled in, picked her up, held her, and spoke softly into her hair. When the little girl had finally calmed down, Nai sat her gently in a chair and began sweeping up the little fragments of china. The little girl sat and sniffed softly. She reached out a hand when she saw the little head of the dragon descend into the waste bin.